All right, so let's dig into how to separate information from misinformation or disinformation. Tonight, we're going to spend about 45 minutes together learning some practical, no-nonsense tools for verifying the news so that before you share something with your friends, family, or community, you could feel confident that it's actually true because our credibility matters. We're going to cover a lot of ground tonight, why misinformation spreads, how to evaluate what you're reading, how to check images, and how to find out who actually owns the news source you're reading from. We'll also share a resource list you can take home and use right away. This is going to be interactive, so feel free to drop questions in the chat as we go. We'll collect questions and answer them at the end of the training. So let's get into it.
I'm sorry, in the beginning. Let's have a little reality chat. Raise your hand or drop a yes in the chat if you've ever shared something online that you found out later wasn't true. I definitely have. No question. Don't feel bad. It happens to all of us. It's not because we're gullible, it's because misinformation is designed to go viral and spread like that. It's designed to trigger an emotional reaction, fear, outrage, excitement, before your brain has a chance to slow down and ask, wait, is this actually real? So before we go any further, let's hear from you. In one word or phrase, where do you get most of your news? Podcasts, newspapers. Substat's a new one that's gotten very popular. I love the New York Times. All of these are great places, and it's hard to tell which are safe and which ones aren't. Obviously, um, you know, some things have reputations than others, but here's what we know from the research. False news spreads 6 times faster on social media than true news. And the stories that make us the angriest or the most scared are often the ones most likely to be fabricated or distorted. Let me define a couple of terms for you that you'll hear a lot. It's misinformation and disinformation. Misinformation is false or inaccurate information spread without intent to deceive. The person sharing it genuinely believes it's true and it's an honest mistake, but it can still cause real harm. Disinformation is false information spread deliberately and intentionally to deceive. A coordinated, purposeful act designed to manipulate public opinion, sow confusion, or undermine trust in institutions. An example of this is when Trump said he obliterated Iran's nuclear capabilities and then went in a month later, started a war saying they're going to get a nuclear weapon within a week. That's disinformation. The key difference is intent. Misinformation is wrong but well-meaning. Disinformation is wrong on purpose. So what can we do about it? The good news is that verification doesn't require a journalism degree. It takes maybe 60, 90 seconds, and tonight we're going to show you exactly how to do it.
The first tool we want to introduce to you is called SIFT. It's a 4-step framework developed by digital literacy educator Mike Caulfield, and it's one of the most practical things you can walk away with tonight. SIFT stands for Stop, Investigate the Source, Find Better Coverage, and Trace Claims, Quotes, and Media. So let's walk through each one. S for stop. Before you like, share, or react, just stop, take a breath, notice what you're feeling. If a headline is making you really angry or really excited, that's actually a signal to slow down, not speed up. Emotional reactions are exactly what bad actors are counting on. I for investigate the source. Don't start by reading the article. Start by asking who published this. Use the resources we'll provide later to do a search on the source. Have you heard of them? Are they known for credible reporting, or do they have a history of publishing sensational or misleading content? A quick tip, look for an About Us page. Legitimate news organizations are transparent about who they are and what they do. If there's no About page or it looks vague or suspicious, that's a red flag. F is for find better coverage. If the story is real and important, other credible outlets will be covering it too. Do a quick search for the key claim in the headline. If you can only find it on an obscure website or social media, be skeptical. If the AP, Reuters, NPR, or your local paper is reporting it, that's a good sign it checks out. T is for trace claims, quotes, and media. A lot of misinformation takes something real, a quote, a photo, a statistic, and strips it of context. So trace it back to the original source. If an article says, according to a study, go find that study. If it quotes a public figure, search for the original quote. If it includes a shocking image, we'll show you how to check that in just a minute. Which step of SIFT do you think will be the hardest for you personally and why? Go ahead and drop your answers in the chat. For me, it's going to be stop because it's hard to pause when something makes me emotional. Janie says checking out the source, looking up a study, but also stop. Jared's on the same page as me with stop. Pat says investigate. All right. These are all valid answers. And awareness of these is already half the battle. And Morgan's going to talk to you about reverse image search.
All right. So speaking of images, one of the most common forms of misinformation is a real photo used in the wrong context. The photo from the protest in 2015 gets shared as if it's something today. A natural disaster image from one country gets labeled as another. It happens constantly. The good news, you can check this in about 30 seconds using a reverse image search. So here's how you do it. On a computer, let me share my screen. You'll see this image. And you right click on the image and you get this menu. And at the bottom, it says, search this image with Google Lens. Now, this probably applies to using Chrome, but there are probably other ways to do it. And when you do that, it searches the information and it says whether it's true or not. So this is not true. And it's because it looks like the image that Donald Trump shared, but it's been altered. And it's been altered by Adam, the creator, on April 29th. If you're on your phone, don't worry about it because whether you have an Apple, iPhone, or an Android, there is a Google Lens app that you can take a screenshot of and then use the same Google Lens feature to reverse image search it. So screenshot the image, go to Google Images. Stop sharing this now. And tap the camera icon and upload the screenshot. If the image shows up in articles from years ago or a completely different event or country, you know something is off. So let's take a look at this.
Oh, that's the example you just showed us.
That's the Snopes version of it. But basically, it's Snope. I'll get to Snopes later. But another great tool for this is Tineye, TINEYE.com, which specializes specifically in reverse image searching. One more thing that's also worth mentioning is that AI generated images are becoming increasingly realistic and increasingly common. So a few things to look for: odd details in hands, fingers, teeth, ears. AI still struggles with these. Backgrounds that look slightly melted or unnaturally smooth, text in the image that's garbled or nonsensical, lighting or shadows that don't match across the image. When in doubt, reverse image search it. And if it doesn't show up anywhere, that itself can be a clue that it was generated by AI rather than a photograph.
So here's something most people don't think about when they're reading the news. Who owns this outlet? Someone in the chat just asked, is Snopes still reliable? And I said, I think so, but it's worth looking into who owns it. Ownership matters. A news organization owned by a large corporation, a hedge fund, a political donor, or a foreign entity may have editorial priorities or conflicts of interest that shape what gets covered and how. That doesn't automatically make their reporting false, but it's important context. So here's a quick primer on media ownership in the United States. Most major TV networks and newspapers are owned by a small number of large corporations. Local news has been heavily consolidated over the past 2 decades. Many outlets that look like independent local newspapers or news stations are actually owned by large chains. And increasingly, hedge funds have purchased news organizations primarily as financial assets, often cutting staff and resources in ways that affect the quality of coverage. So, how do you find out who owns a news outlet? Number one, check the About Us page. Many outlets will disclose their parent company or ownership structure there. If they don't, that in itself is worth noting. You can also search the outlet name plus the word ownership or outlet name parent company. This usually surfaces the answer quickly. Wikipedia is often a good starting point for this kind of lookup. Step three, using the links I'll put in the chat. You can search the Harvard database. The other two links are a look at who owns major media outlets. And I will also drop in the local journalism directory. And just a reminder, we're going to send all of these links out not only in an email, but we're going to give you a PDF at the end of this training that you can save to your computer or your phone. And that will have all of these links in it as well. But now, beyond ownership, many of you are probably also wondering, does this outlet lean left, right, or center? This is also a question worth asking, but it's important to understand what political lean actually means. Every news organization makes editorial choices: what to cover, what angle to take, whose voices to amplify. That doesn't mean the facts are wrong, but it does mean you're getting a particular perspective. So a few things to keep in mind. Lean is not the same as accuracy. An outlet can lean left or right and still report facts accurately. An outlet can appear neutral and still publish misleading content. Reading across the political spectrum makes you a more informed consumer. If you only read sources that confirm what you already believe, you're more vulnerable to misinformation, not less. I know it makes my blood boil to read things from the right leaning perspective, but it's something that I really try to make a practice of so that I get kind of the idea of how the left is covering it and how the right is covering it. Also, use bias rating tools like the ones I'll put in the chat as the starting point, not as the final word. No rating system is perfect, and reasonable people can disagree about where a particular outlet falls. So here are a couple of media bias charts and checkers. The general rule of thumb is know the lens you're looking through and occasionally pick up a different one. Now, do you tend to stick to news sources that you already trust, or do you actively seek out different perspectives? No judgment, just honest reflection. Drop your answer in the chat. He says both. Oh, and Jared dropped another media bias fact check. Carolyn said multiple sources. Jenny says stick with what I know and trust. All right. Morgan, let's you take us to the next section.
All right. So fact checking and trusted resources. Let's put it all together with your resource toolkit. These are the sites and tools we want you to bookmark tonight. Snopes.com. It's one of the oldest and most trusted fact-checking sites. Great for viral stories, rumors, and social media claims. I saw somebody ask, is it still reliable? Snopes doesn't get everything right all the time, but it still does what it does the same way it always has. So I would say it is still reliable to check whether something is true or not, particularly something that's gone viral. There's factcheck.org, which is run by the Annenberg Public Policy Center, particularly strong on political claims and election-related misinformation. There's politifact.com, uses a truthometer to rate political statements from true to pants on fire. It's very accessible and easy to navigate. And finally is the AP Fact Check. The Associated Press runs a dedicated fact-checking team. It's reliable, nonpartisan, and updated frequently. For media bias, there's mediabiasfactcheck.com, rates outlets on both factual accuracy and political lean. It's a great first step when you're evaluating an unfamiliar source. There's allsides.com, which shows the same story covered by outlets across the political spectrum, side by side. Excellent for understanding how framing shapes perception. They also have a great media bias database. I also like to use groundnews.com. They've also got an app where it will identify the bias of a particular article that you're looking at. Sean will put a PDF in the chat with all the resources from this training, a list of trusted news sources, and a how-to guide for finding reliable news sources. A big thank you to Jared for creating the list of news sources and tips for finding reliable news. And the recording will be up on our YouTube channel this weekend. A quick tip for using all of these. Don't wait until you're suspicious of something to visit these sites. Spend 10 minutes this week just exploring them, a few of them so you're familiar with how they work before you need them in the moment.
So let's bring this all together. Here's your quick reference checklist for the next time you see something that seems surprising, outrageous, or too good to be true. Stop, pause before you share or react. Check the source. Who published this and are they credible? Find out who owns the outlet and whether it has known bias. Search for other coverage. Are other reliable news outlets reporting the same thing? Look for at least 2 or 3 other trusted news sources before you share. Trace the original claim, find the primary source, reverse image search. If there's a photo, verify it. Use a fact-checking site like Snopes, FactCheck, PolitiFact, and AP. None of this has to take more than 2 minutes. And the more you practice it, the faster and more instinctive it becomes. We're not trying to make you cynical about everything you read. Most news is real, which is unfortunate these days. But most journalists are doing their jobs honestly. What we want is for you to have the tools to tell the difference and to feel confident sharing information that you know is solid. So let me pull up that PDF that Sean just put in the chat. All right. Suggestion is to start with these news sources which are the most reliable. wire services, which have straight facts and minimal bias, like Reuters and Associated Press. They focus on factual reporting. They're used by newsrooms worldwide with little to no opinion content. Next, check balanced news sources, center to slightly left, but still broadly trusted. Those would be BBC News, The Hill, and Bloomberg. Generally balanced coverage, some framing differences depending on the topic, and still grounded in factual reporting. Then deep dive and investigate. Nonprofit with high credibility. Those include ProPublica, PBS News, and NPR. They have in-depth reporting and investigations. They are not partisan organizations, and they may lean slightly left in tone, but are fact-based. Next, you want to add global perspective. That includes Al Jazeera and The Economist, Agents Press, Agency France Press, and the Canadian Press. It helps reduce the US centric bias and offers broader context on global issues. Next, you can check mainstream TV news, which are generally reliable. ABC News, which is owned by the Walt Disney Company, and NBC News, which is owned by Comcast. They're widely trusted mainstream outlets, strong reporting standards, more concise TV style coverage, less depth per story. And then a couple of Colorado news sources that are local and trusted are the Colorado Sun and Colorado Public Radio. There are also some additional sources with honorable mentions in that PDF. And you want to keep in mind that center is not perfectly neutral. Even reliable outlets have some perspective, and headlines and framing can still vary. So your best practice is to check 2 to 3 news sources before coming to a conclusion about that news story. Allsides.com shows the same story covered by outlets across the political spectrum, side by side. It's excellent for understanding how framing shapes perception. They also have a great media bias database. And here is allsides.com. Smart news habits include watching for loaded or emotional language. You want to be skeptical of dramatic or oversimplified claims. Separate news reporting from opinion, and prioritize evidence over commentary. So there is a simple daily news routine. For headlines, check Reuters or AP. For context, check NPR or ProPublica. And for local, choose a trusted source where you live from the local journalism directory. And I'll drop that link in the chat again here. So that's a way to get great news coverage in about 10 minutes per day. And then all the links that we dropped earlier and the instructions for the reverse image search are also in that document. And I'll throw it in the chat here one more time. All right. And then let's see here. So that's the core content for tonight. But before we go to questions, I want to give everyone one final moment to reflect. What is one thing you're going to do differently the next time you see a news story or viral post? Drop it in the chat and hold yourself accountable. Oh yeah, Pat, free speech TV is local. That's a great one.
And while you do that, I'm just going to throw this out. Especially on social media, people share things and you look at it and the source is something you've never heard of. It's a blog, it's a podcast, it's something unusual. And just to put a point on what Tiffany was saying, if you go and search for that topic, if you see something that you hadn't heard of that's sensational, you do a search for it, it'll show up in other places if it's real. There will be a New York Times article. There will be, an NBC News video. It will be out there somewhere, and that can corroborate the article that was shared. If there's nothing else about it, if you can't find more information about it, be suspicious. Because if things are newsworthy, they're going to show up if they're true.
All right. So let's take some questions. Aaron, go ahead.
I'm not sure if you mentioned this because I had to step out for a second, but one trick they use is instead of like CNN.com, it'll be CNN dot something else. So you'll think that it's coming from a reliable source, but it's all fake.
Oh, yeah. Thank you for mentioning that. So always check the link at the top of your browser. They can even completely fake the news site so it looks just like CNN, for example.
In another way so that would be if you see CNN.org or CNN.net, it's not the same necessarily as CNN.com. But if there's a link that shows up that says, link to the article that doesn't have the HTTPS and all of this rest of the stuff with the URL, clicking on that link can take you to a URL that is entirely unrelated and can be something completely different from where you think you're going and can lead you to a site that is misleading. Dan, do you have a question?
Yeah, a kind of comment slash question. I guess the question really is, how do you take this into account? It's this. The New York Times, for instance, is pretty well respected as a fairly objective and reliable reporter of facts and what's going on. But by the same token, it, like most legacy media, is biased in the sense that it focuses on issues and activities that are important to the business people that read it and the politicians, the muckety mucks that read it. For instance, New York Times coverage of the various No Kings rallies was really pretty negligible. Their coverage made it seem like there was hardly anything going on, like the public uprising around the country is really not much about what's going on. It's or they'll report something on page 38B rather than on the front page, and those kinds of editorial decisions reflect the news, the facts, so-called, that people learn about what's happening in the world. It doesn't prioritize what you and I might think are the most important things in the world. For many years, for instance, it didn't prioritize what the Israeli government was doing to Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza. So anyway, do you think that that is something that we need to pay attention to? And if so, how can we know what that kind of hidden bias is?
Yes, so using some of the resources in that PDF and that we'll send out in our email, I would look up who owns the New York Times. And then you can also use sites like allsides.com to check the different how a site leans. I think the New York Times leans a bit left. But I think it's also important to check news from different outlets. So check, for example, this link on All Sides will show you the same news story from different perspectives. So they'll show you left-leaning news coverage, center and right-leaning news coverage of the same story. So I think it's good to do things like that. And then get your news from different sources. So I know like Midas Touch is a good one for very left-leaning news. Although their YouTube headlines are a bit sensational, but I know that's what it takes to get clicks these days. But those are just a few things you can use to take into account what you're talking about, Ken, because it's absolutely true that news sources are going to have some kind of context based on who owns them.
I would follow that up by saying it is impossible to remove bias. Everybody has a little bias from their background, where they come from, and that applies to the people and editors in these news outlets. Some of them, like NPR, New York Times, have a reputation for skewing a little bit left, but a lot of times that's because they're actually reporting facts, and those facts upset the people on the right. So they label them as these leftist organizations. One of the things to check for, regardless of what news organization you look for, is their journalistic standards. Do they have an ombudsman? Do they have, things that would be used to produce good journalism? But ultimately, all of these news outlets, whether you're talking about a website, a podcast, a radio station, TV news, print, in a for-profit society, you have to follow the money. And the money will frequently make editorial decisions for people. Just look at CBS. They came under fire from the administration. They fired their top news person, brought in somebody who's going to be more sympathetic to the government, changed their nightly news anchor, and don't have a bias that they didn't have before. So money drives everything, and it's important to know where that's coming from, because that will ultimately decide whether no king's on page 18 in a little paragraph, or if it's a front page news article above the fold. So those are the things that I would look for when it comes to that, and just assume everything has a bias. And if you can identify it, that's going to go a long way to helping you figure out what's true.
I was
Excellent.
recommending a couple of podcasts in the chat, and I've been meaning to give you all a list of my favorite podcasts. So I'll try to put that together for next week.
Yeah, I'm
So on
really,
with our, oh, go ahead.
Tiffany, I was just going to say, I'm really enjoying a lot of the independent journalists on Substack. There's a lot of good stuff going on there, taking the
Yeah,
money.
a lot of people were recommending Substack earlier, and it's not something that I've gotten into. My dad is definitely super into it. He finally got off TikTok and now he's on Substack, so at least that's better.
Douglas asks, what are your thoughts on The Guardian?
I love the
Well,
Guardian.
we can do a search if we want to find out who owns the Guardian.
I'll let Tiffany do that. The Guardian is one of the newspapers in England. Somebody also talked about BBC in the chat. International news sources are a great way to get a perspective outside of what our native, American sources are giving us. And it lets you see things very differently. Kind of a little bit when King Charles King spoke to Congress last week. Getting things from the Guardian, the BBC that are, like the other reputable news places we're talking about, can be a very valuable way to do it. Another source that, people have talked about a lot is Al Jazeera. And there is definitely a bias to Al Jazeera, but when it comes to covering Middle East issues that don't get covered anywhere else, it is a news source. I wouldn't, anyway, you can look into all of these things, and I'm going to let Tiffany go when she find out her information. But my feeling is I like the Guardian, and I think it's reputable because it has the same journalistic standards or higher journalistic standards than a lot of other newspapers in the United States and around the world. And it doesn't have quite the same, I would say, financial pressures that some of these kind of smaller American city newspapers have on them to keep themselves alive.
All right, so good news. The Guardian is owned by the Scott Trust Limited, which exists to secure the editorial independence and financial future of the newspaper in perpetuity. It is part of the Guardian Media Group when profits are reinvested into journalism rather than distributed to owners or shareholders.
You only get a couple of free articles, and then you have to pay a lot of money to join.
That's a
become
good
member.
point. Yep. So it is unfortunate that there are paywalls for a lot of the news sources, and there are definitely a lot of free news sources out there. I think we all should consider where our dollars go. So if you have the money to give to either independent news sources, or important news sources like The Guardian, I think it's a good place to use your money. But yes, as you pointed out, Ken, The Guardian can be quite expensive.
Michelle asked, could we get our own frequency?
I'm not sure what you mean by that, Michelle. Do you want to come off mute or put it in the chat?
I think she's talking about a radio frequency or a TV frequency.
Oh, okay.
If that is the case, basically the spectrum that TV and radio uses is controlled by the government. It is split up. You can get a frequency. Part of it depends on, for a radio station, your locality, what frequencies are free and available. They're not free. You have to pay the government, and a lot of times they go up for auction, particularly for TV stations, because those frequencies are usually much higher in demand. So yes, you can get it, but it is likely to be cost prohibitive and come with a lot of regulation before you would be able to even start your own TV show or radio show. And at this point, it is so much easier to start a podcast or a blog that it would be almost not worth doing, because look at what happened with MSNBC when they started that. It just never caught on enough to really be profitable. So from that perspective, it's much easier to get a webcam and put up a YouTube podcast instead of trying to get something over the air.
Cynthia just asked oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say it's possible, but there are going to be barriers.
On top of that, Cynthia asked, is shortwave radio still a thing? Do you know anything about that, Morgan?
I do know a little bit about it. It is still a thing. There are actually ham radio communities that do it. It is definitely much smaller than it used to be, and it's not something that I would consider necessarily a reliable source of news. Most of it is going to be people talking to each other across distances and people who are kind of into the ham radio community. But it does still exist. It's got its own little niche, and that is also something that you need to get a license to do. I also know that there are a lot of people that got adapters for their cell phones that can broadcast over radio frequencies for small distances. I think if you're under 300 feet, maybe 300 yards, It is legal to broadcast on FM frequencies without a license, as long as it's not a frequency that somebody else is using. So people will, put this on their phone and then drive around in their car with this radio frequency playing out their playlist. And, there are people in the ham radio community who do that, and some of them can be news based, but it's not something that I would consider very reliable.
Talks about starting a podcast, but as soon as they make a 48-hour day, we'll get right on that.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's one of the things we've been kicking around, and our to-do list is very long.
What's up next, Sean?
I do like the point that Amy made. We're talking about this the day Ted Turner died, because he died today.
I did not know that.
Yes, the creator of CNN.
I Ted Turner was a weird guy. Once he sold CNN, he became really into protecting bison, particularly kind of genetically pure bison. But there's a steakhouse called Ted Montana's right off Airport Road that is his chain that he sold bison through. And I didn't know that he just died.
He was born in 1938. I just learned right now.
Oh, yeah. So that makes him 92.
He was 87.
He's my math's not working today.
But when he founded CNN in 1980, during just after the Iranian Revolution, and the thing was reporting every night on what was going on with the hostages and negotiations and whatever, trying to get them out. And it started the whole notion that maybe we ought to be paying more attention to really what's happening in the world. That was before, obviously, CNN became kind of this sort of a bluff and let's let every idiot talk, including whatever his name is, not Brett Stevens, guy who was on ABC, an awful right-wing guy. Anyway, CNN used to be good. It actually believed in covering news in depth. Christian, I'm an poor veteran started.
Mm-hmm.
And somebody recently acquired CNN. Who is that?
The Ellisons.
May have been the Ellison kid or somebody else.
Yep, the ones that own Paramount. They're
Oh
buying
yeah,
Warner
Paramount
Brothers.
did.
Okay.
Paramount, Skydance.
It
I
is good to
don't know
know
if it's
that
final.
CNN was the first 24-hour news channel. Like,
Yeah.
that's where the 24-hour news cycle started. Before that, there was news, at 7 in the morning, noon, 6, and 10. And if you missed the nightly news, that was it. There wasn't a website to go and get it. But then CNN started having news 24/7 all the time as a cable channel. And that's where it began. And they even went and had a headline news channel where they had the 30-minute news like you would get from your local station, repeated every 30 minutes all day long, and they would update it. Like Ken said, it was, and to some extent even now, is a fairly trusted news source, even though Ted Turner was a billionaire and owned a bunch of other stations. I think he owned a sports team for a while, and definitely, I believe he was leaning Republican. But the news itself on CNN did a very good job of being objective, especially in the beginning. Now that it's owned by Paramount, we have no idea what's going to happen.
He had 1 million acres of land.
Wow.
The nation's largest bison herd all over the country.
I know there's one up in Montana, a big one.
Anyone else have any questions?
Thank you so much for doing this because I think it's so part and partial to protecting our First Amendment rights, especially with freedom of the press and speech and the mockery this regime has done to control that. To that end, what I want to know is how can we best insist that there be no more censorship and screening and all this other crap that's going on with the FCC? I mean, I am heartbroken that they could have put enough pressure and money and power to take Stephen Colbert off the air. But that might be small in the bigger picture. But right now, I think more importantly, we have to find better ways, or I don't know what else to say, but if we lose more of the press and that freedom, that First Amendment, we're screwed. That's all. If you have
Yep,
any
I
ideas,
hear
let me
you.
know. Yeah.
Jeanette, what do you got?
Hey, Tiffany. I just put up some plugs for a lot of stuff that's on PBS because I'm just astounded. Every year or so, I run into friends that are pretty well informed, and they go, "Oh, I haven't watched CBS since my kids watched PBS. I'm sorry, PBS since my kids watched Sesame Street." And I went,
You
"Okay,
should be.
a lot's happened to PBS since then." Including things like Independent Lens and Frontline and really long investigative journalism. Christiane Amanpour, has people from all over the world and longer interviews with folks. And they also have, and a lot of people don't know this in Denver, but more than any city I've ever lived in, we have two public television channels, and each of them have four separate channels on each of them. So it's 6.1, 2, 3, and 4. And 6.4 has a lot of international stuff. And 12.1, 3, and 4 have international stuff. So news from France, news from Britain, news from Germany, and 12 point, I think it's 2, has a lot of that channel specifically for highlighting Native American and Indian country news, which I don't hear almost anywhere but there. But it's free, it's public, and there's a reason, I guess this is my last piece, there's a reason why the Republicans and the conservatives for 20 to 40 years have tried to undermine and get rid of public broadcasting, their corporation and funding, because it feels threatening to them. Even though, I mean, I know people who think it's somewhat left, but it really has many decent journalists, and I think it's interesting that people have really rallied around NPR and PBS in cities, but sadly, the people most hit by the cuts are small places that PBS and NPR have tried to get to, small towns and rural places all over the country, and they're the ones who are probably going to lose their stations. But here in Denver, man, we've got 8 of them just on TV, let alone Boulder NPR and Denver NPR. And it's not like it's the only thing we need to listen to. It's not the only thing I listen to, but I'm surprised how little people know about it. And not a whole lot of money goes into creating it compared to these massive Fox and Friends kind of stuff. And there's some really good people working in it who just choose to stay in public broadcasting. So
Jeanette,
thanks for that. Yeah.
I watch Create all the time. 6-3.
Yeah.
I absolutely love it. To answer your question, Laura, controlling the media is part of the authoritarian playbook. As long as the administration controls the FCC, we're not going to be able to do much about it. And we need to look at it not from a news lens and how do we protect this lens, but how do we fight the fascists that are trying to control the media and the message that we get out? So, ultimately there is a limit to what we can do to protect free speech from this administration, but there are other ways to support reliable news sources that are outside the administration that aren't saying what they want. And specifically, to tie that into what Jeanette was saying, a lot of people don't realize that NPR and PBS are, the public broadcast system, national public radio. They are public entities that aren't owned by any corporation. They are made on a membership model with support from the government in a way that is going to remove the profit motive bias from what they do. And, there are a lot of people who look at it and say, well, that's socialist. But because they're able to work on this membership model, they are able to work for the people because the people that they are accountable to are those members that are giving them money to keep them alive. And people don't necessarily understand that about NPR and PBS, that really they are bottom down or bottom up grassroots kind of people that rely on their members as opposed to corporations for their funding.
Well, but
Right.
also one thing that they do, somebody said that uh, the right wingers are afraid of PBS, but they're silly to be afraid because it's just factual. Well, they have every reason to be afraid, exactly because PBS covers the facts objectively. And, the part of the authoritarian playbook is to hide the ball and to not let the public see what they're doing, how they're reducing our democratic rights, how they're, stealing money for themselves, all this corruption, and enriching themselves. The Trumps have made billions of dollars just in the 1 year he's been back in office. And think about all of his friends and cronies who, how much money has Elon Musk made in the last year or so? And it really makes a difference to have somebody actually covering that. And programs like Frontline, for instance, frequently have very perceptive undercover people go into the Proud Boy movement or, Christian nationalist movements or, right-wing organizations, and they're covering what's really happening and showing how they build their power and infiltrate and take over public institutions from school boards on up. That transparency really is what's necessary in the democratic system to hold people accountable.
I'm not going to debate anything or contest anything that's been said because you're right on the money. And I've been with PBS, I can't even count the years. But having said that, the the federal court just put a block on Trump's agenda to not fund NPR and PBS. I don't know if people are aware of it, but there is a hold on that. So money's going to start coming in. The second
Fine.
thing is that only would have happened if we, the people, so to say, didn't put pressure on Congress and our elected officials. We can't put up with this crap anymore. I mean, we've never had this censorship, well, except during the McCarthy era, in recent times, there has not been this kind of censorship. So that's all I'm trying to say is we need
Mm-hmm.
to let these people know we're on it. We're not going to stop and to try to do our best to protect these journalists because they deserve it.
Quit
I
attacking Big
heard
Bird.
that
That's right. You leave my big bird and, Grover and the rest of them alone.
I hadn't heard that they had put that injunction in, and
Yes,
I'm very glad to hear it. And I don't like to be somebody to throw my hands up and say there's nothing that you can do.
that's my point.
The way that you can do something to protect freedom of the press and journalism and these kinds of things are support the organizations that are independent and that are fighting. So things like the ACLU, the Electronic Freedom Foundation, the news organizations that are deeply looking into the administration, the ones that Donald Trump likes to kick out of his press conferences and say you're terrible people. Supporting those groups that are doing the journalism and the investigation into how much money Trump is making. How they're going to ask for $1 billion for the privately funded ballroom now for security. All of these things, the people, there are people who are looking into this who are both biased and unbiased. And those are the people that you want to support, because as an individual, I can't protect the freedom of the press. But the groups that are out there doing it can have some leverage, because they can, if nothing else, expose the corruption. And so people know that it's going on, and not let the press be bullied into saying and doing things that are inaccurate.
And hats off to Ezra and Leah
Yes.
for doing that, because they're all over MSN now. Occasionally you catch them on CNN, Midas Touch, all what I call the independents, the underground, but they're out there and they're being heard, which is awesome. So,
They have
And
their
and
own
we
podcast now too.
oh, they do?
Yeah, let me see if I
Oh,
can find like a link to it.
and
that'd be
we
great.
have to go beyond just them. They're doing all this great stuff, and we should support them and watch and take in everything that they teach. But we also, I think, have an obligation to be out on the streets and
Yep,
writing and getting our own through
yep.
our own words and our own connections, our own
Mhm.
networks, making sure everybody hears the message that Ezra and Lee are putting out, the message that the ACLU is putting out,
Right.
all these various issues that we've been talking about here. Yeah, we should look at all of these Substacks and all, but then we should also amplify them and get them
Hmm.
out so that everybody in the country knows that this is what's happening, in my
Agreed.
opinion.
Go ahead, Jenny.
Speaking of Leah and Ezra, before this is over tonight, I wanted to be sure to shout out about Monday night. Ezra will be with the Indivisible kickoff for Julie Gonzalez
Yes.
call. And I know that Tiffany, you've put the information on the Signal chat for people to be able to join that on Monday night. But I would recommend everybody please join it. Everybody that you know, invite them to join that too. I think it's going to be Julie Gonzalez is fantastic, and
Yep.
she does not have much money. She doesn't have the money that Hickenlooper has, so she needs all the support she can get. And Ezra's going to be there.
Here is I'll put that link in the chat.
And I was going to say, the one thing that we as individuals can do to make a difference is go out in the streets, attend the protests, put pressure on the administration until it breaks. And the press is one of the pillars of support that, if you see the ways that it's covered this administration, some of it certainly props it up. And if we can knock those pillars of support down and have millions of people out in the streets putting pressure on the administration, that can make a difference. And that's what we can do to protect the freedom of the press and freedom of speech and all of the amendments that are under fire at the moment. So even though you can't, stop pressure on, the TV stations from getting their licenses revoked and things like that. Being part of the movement and getting out and protesting is a way to make your voice heard when it wouldn't be heard otherwise.
Carolyn also brought up the Media and Democracy Project's working hard to ensure we have a free press. One of our efforts included this petition over a Fox News station. Go ahead, Carolyn.
Last night, I'm one of the founders and on the leadership team for Media and Democracy Project, and we hosted a watch party for Democracy Under Siege with the director, and then Gigi San. If you pay much attention, she was nominated by Biden to be on the FCC, but the Republicans trashed her life, trashed her, or tried to keep her from getting confirmed, and she finally dropped out. But the Media and Democracy Project has a lot of things that are going on, and we have a monthly meeting, and you always leave with actions. So if you're interested, just check us out.
Thank you. Can you put a link in the chat that people can check out?
Absolutely. And we have a local journalism, a searchable local journalism directory where you can just click on your state and it'll pull up local journalism outlets in your state. So it's really a great way to get away from WAPO, New York Times, and that kind of thing.
Very
Yeah,
cool.
we have that one.
Thank you.
Another thing is to look for kind of small independent news organizations, something like, the Village Voice in New York City. St. Louis has the Riverfront Times. They've changed over time, but those little independent local news organizations, a lot of times will cover things that you won't see anywhere else, and will do it in a way that is less biased, and a lot of times, especially if they're ad supported, they tend to have a little more of that public support angle, the way PBS and NPR do. And that may be another good place to look for information that you wouldn't normally be able to find anywhere else.
Thank you all, and I hope you have a great night.